So tonight we're going to be asking Rocco, who's very actually has a lot of in-depth knowledge on the Austrian School, some basic questions that people get on daily basic questions on the Austrian School, objections, or things that they just want to know more about. So probably the first question, Rocco, I would have is where and how the Austrian School did actually come about.
I think Karl Menger is generally named kind of the father of the Austrian School. He was one of the co-discoverers of the subjective theory of value, one of the independent co-discoverers. And Ludwig von Mises was one of his students, and that really stuck with him. And he took that and some of Menger's other work and really fleshed it out into a pretty complete and cohesive theory of economics. And he published that in Human Action. And Rothbard, one of his students, took that and fleshed it out even more, corrected a few errors, filled in some gaps, and published that in Man, Economy, and State. And today we've got some of the students of Rothbard and or Mises, and so that's kind of how the lineage has gone.
Okay. Now, Steve Horowitz actually has a video on what Austrian economics is and what it is not. Now, for those who have not watched it, what would you tell people who are new to learning about it or unfamiliar? As far as building on what Horowitz said, what would you actually tell people who are new to it about what it is and what it is not? Because there sometimes seems to be some misconceptions or misunderstandings on the school.
Sure. Horowitz's video is great. I loved it. I disagree with him on quite a few issues, so I was surprised how little I disagreed with that video. It was really good. There's kind of two Austrian camps, and Horowitz is in the other camp from the one I'm in, which is the one that as Mises pretty consistently put it, is that it's defined by the epistemology. It's not defined by a set of conclusions. It's defined by how we reach conclusions, and which is not through empirical observation. We don't observe the world around us and then try to induce from there and come up with theories and formulas or anything like that. We start with the action axiom, man acts, and you logically deduce from there, and there's a surprising amount of statements that can be deduced from that. And from there you can build a complete school of economics. And so I think the one thing that I would add, and maybe the most important thing I think I can say about what the Austrian School is and what defines it, is it's how we study economics, not the set of conclusions that we come to.
Right. Kind of like what Horowitz said, it's an analytical tool set on how markets work, pretty much.
Right.
Okay. Now, one of the tenets of Austrian economics is that it's a descriptive and not prescriptive. So, would you be able to explain that a little on what the two terms mean?
Sure. Austrians say, economists, what economists basically ought to be doing, like physicists do about physics. They don't talk about what protons ought to do. It's their job to discover what protons actually do. And so, as economists, that's what we do. What will happen in markets? What happens in a free market? And so we isolate the way physicists do. You don't drop a feather to discover a theory of gravity because you'll screw it all up. You want to isolate things from each other so you can study them in their pure form and then study the interactions when things start getting more complex. So we study the free market first. What happens when nobody's interfering and people are able to do as they please, and then we study. From there, we study what then are the effects of various external forces from government or anything else.
That's cool. Now when Austrians say that they're not prescriptive, but when Austrian economists make policy suggestions in which they get their knowledge from Austrian theory, what's the difference? Because some people will say it's semantics to say it doesn't make prescriptions, but then you got Horowitz or, Bob Murphy saying, well, I suggest this.
Sure. So economics is descriptive. Most economists can take that knowledge and say, well, then, because of what we know, we should not have a policy like this, or we should have a policy like that, which is prescriptive. But on the other hand, that's giving, in most cases at least, that's given some probably safe assumptions about things everybody agrees on. For example, we don't want unemployment to go up. Since everybody doesn't want unemployment to go up, I would say, given that you don't want unemployment to go up, then you should not have a policy that puts upward pressure on unemployment. And so, and in most cases, it's probably useful to skip that part. Everybody doesn't want unemployment to go up, so you just say, don't raise the minimum wage, because unemployment will be higher than it would otherwise have been.
When you say otherwise, another objection that you just kind of touch base on is when you say otherwise, people say that you're kind of making assumptions because, you're just kind of making assumptions based off, hunches or something. Can you kind of analyze that or kind of respond to that?
Sure, it's a logical analysis, right? You've got would-be employees and would-be employers. As an employer, I can afford to pay somebody this much money to perform this task, and that will be profitable. And any more than that will not be profitable, and that job will go undone. And so, if I can pay you $5 to, run around the campus and take out the trash, then if that's worth that to me or to my business, then I'm going to do that, unless, of course, it's illegal for me to hire you for $5. If I have to hire you for $8, at a minimum, then I'm not likely going to hire you for $8. I'm not going to hire you at all. It'll go undone, or I'll find some other solution to that problem, because I'm losing money hiring somebody at a job that doesn't produce as much as it costs. And so that puts upward pressure on unemployment. For example, I think a couple of my favorite examples are movie theater ushers and gas station attendants, which they used to be in all the movie theaters and all the gas stations, because a lot of kids, getting paid $2-3 an hour, and as the minimum wage goes up, those jobs go away. It isn't worth $8 an hour to have somebody pumping your gas for you, or to have people in the movie theater making sure people aren't making a bunch of noise, or helping old ladies walk up to their seats. So those jobs just disappear.
Mm-hmm. Now, when people say, when speaking of minimum wage, they'll say, well, in today's market, no one could survive off of, $5 an hour minimum wage. Is there a response to that? I mean,
sure. I think there's an assumption by people making that argument that there's a large number of people making the minimum wage, and only about 3% of the workforce, about 2% of the population make the minimum wage, and that's because it's not, as the minimum wage goes up, it doesn't bring everybody up with them, so that now that you've got hundreds of thousands of people making the minimum wage, as the minimum wage goes up, those people just fall down below that into unemployment. And of that 3% of the workforce that does make the minimum wage, very few of them have any reason to earn a living wage. They're not not the primary wage earner in the household. They're kids just getting started. They're waiters and waitresses. They're still living with mom and dad. They're retired and supplementing their income. So very few of the people making minimum wage need to earn what people are calling a living wage, which they never do actually define.
Seems like living wage could be anywhere from $12 an hour to $135 or whatever that means.
Right. It depends on where you live. Do you have kids? Are you married? What's your rent like? It can't be defined.
Now, taking a step back a bit, Mises says, and the Austrian School says, man acts. Or so, what does it mean for to act?
Well, he defines it pretty explicitly, and he goes on at some length to make sure because it's a very important statement to define it very carefully, and it's specifically about deliberate action, right? If when the doctor hits your knee with the hammer and your leg twitches, that's not action because it's not deliberate. And so if we say I act, we're saying that I have acted deliberately. I've made a decision and acted upon it. And so that implies that I've got a goal, right? I'm acting in order to accomplish something, which implies that whatever that goal is something I want, which implies that I'm, acting in pursuit of my self-interest. It also implies that I'm employing some means to some end that I want, that I've subjectively chosen that pleases me, satisfies a need or want that I have, and so we derive from there to build the whole school of Austrian thought. But it's definitely very specifically. I think there's a lot of people that haven't read this that comment on it, and say some kind of silly things about, well, what about when I do this thing that obviously is not deliberate? Am I acting? Well, no, we've already tried to very carefully define action as only deliberate action.
Or when people tend to say, well, I went to a bar, spent a bunch of money, got hungover the next day, and they say, well, that can't be rational, so people aren't making rational choices. What about that kind of objection?
Right, and so that's, I think a long time ago, the Chicago school got stood up as the poster boy of free market thought, and their analysis really does have this rational actor problem. The Austrians, or Mises specifically, talks quite a bit about the role of reason in human choice, and it isn't that everything you do is rational. Everything you do is in pursuit of a subjectively chosen goal, is in pursuit of something you want, and then you employ reason to try to discover the best means to get what you want. And that's always error-prone. You can always screw that up, but you're always going to use your brain and use reason to try to determine the best path to what it is that you want. And when you go out on Saturday night, who knows what you want? You want to meet girls, or drink a lot of beers, or just have a night out and relax. Whatever it is your goal is, you believe in advance at least that the best way to satisfy your goal is to go out to the bar and have some drinks.
Yeah, and you can pretty much only say like afterwards if you're better off or worse off, right?
Right. I mean, you can, in most cases, make pretty good guesses. The world is fairly predictable. If you want to do something trivial or simple, you make an action and you can pick something up. We know some things about how the world works, and so it's not completely arbitrary. But yeah, you are going to make these actions with the anticipation that it's going to satisfy your desire, and you may find out later that you chose the wrong course of action, even if you couldn't have known in advance. Something you couldn't have anticipated happened, but you always expect that your action is going to bring about your goal, and if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Right. So what would you say are or at least what would be your favorite, and if you can explain it, what would be your favorite contribution to the Austrian school that they brought?
Can you rephrase that? Are you asking like my favorite economist, or?
Yeah. Oh no. What your favorite contribution of the Austrian school is? If it's time preference, subjective value, or?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a tough one. Subjective value, I think you would have to say, predates the Austrian school a little bit. It kind of grew out of the discovery of subjective value. So I don't think that's a contribution of the Austrian school. Okay. Time preference, I'm also not sure is unique to the Austrian school, but that is a particular favorite subject of mine. I think its importance is usually underestimated even by Austrians. But I think I would say Austrian business cycle theory, because I remember just listening to the radio and watching TV, and we're in a boom, we're in a bust, and occasionally hearing, oh, the business cycle is over, we're never in a new age of prosperity and all that. And I always believed everything everybody told me because they all appeared to know a lot more about economics than I did. I didn't know what caused the business cycle, but and so once I discovered the Austrian School and learned about Austrian business cycle theory, it made absolute perfect sense. It made things that have already happened, kind of predictable in retrospect, like anyone could have predicted that. As Mises predicted the '29 crash, as what's his name, Peter
Schiff.
Yeah, Peter Schiff predicted the '08 crash. So it has so much explanatory and predictive power, and yet all the other schools of thought basically completely reject it. So I think I would name that as my favorite.
No, that's probably my favorite, and I mean, if with you mentioning the subjective value predating them, that if that wasn't the case, that'd probably be my favorite. But probably the business cycle with its explanation on the prior crashes. But you touch base on the Austrian business cycle, so in reference to something that everyone could relate to, in most basic terms, how would you say the housing crisis, the Austrian business cycle, applied to the housing crisis of 2008?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and it's a complicated one because you've got obviously the mass printing of money, but then at the same time you've got all these legislative actions that kind of collaborated to determine where all that new money was going to go, and so it basically went into mortgage lending and higher risk mortgage lending, as they found more and more ways to guarantee loans or to minimize risk or to subsidize risk, and so we're printing all these new dollars, trillions and trillions of new dollars that are going into this one sector of the economy, and so of course housing prices were going up, which is exactly what they want. This made everybody very happy. It meant that you could buy a house, and even if you can't afford it, you can just flip it after a couple of years and make a profit and do it again. And it was a new age of prosperity. But of course, this was completely unsustainable. I mean, for one thing, nobody ever appeared to wonder what's going to be like in 50 years when a cheap house is $1.5 million because housing prices can only ever go up. But that's not what brought about the crash. What brought about the crash was there are real scarce resources underlying all this that don't increase in quantity as money increases in quantity. Printing money doesn't print bricks and lumber and land and labor, and so this is drawing all these scarce resources, raw materials, and so on from other sectors of the economy. They become more expensive as they become, they're actually scarce, and you've got more and more and more and more home builders competing for these same scarce resources. They all think they have access to it because they can borrow money at very low interest rates, and they think that it's going to be profitable. But then those prices of those capital goods and land and labor continue to rise, even though they've got these low interest rates on them. And pretty soon you've got, if you're a home builder, you've got 500 half-built homes, and you just can't get any more of the resources you need to finish that project. And there's a tremendous amount of waste. The project fails. You've lost a lot of money. There's, and all these resources have come from somewhere else. This is labor that came from the manufacturing sector and other parts of the economy, and so now all these guys are unemployed, and they're unemployed with a skill set in construction and looking for construction work. And you've got still all the political promises to prop this up and to try to keep it all going, to reinflate the bubble so that they don't have to go and find work in other sectors or adjust their skill sets or whatever need to be done there. So they're propping it up when the economic realities don't justify this. They don't justify the amount of homes that have been built and bought, and so all these mortgage loans have collapsed. Of course, the credit default swaps and all the stuff that was going on with that. More money was lost than was even invested in it. And so, which was what Peter Schiff kind of had been saying all along. This is a bubble, it's unsustainable, it's going to burst, and he was able to predict with remarkable accuracy using more than just Austrian economics, because the economics itself, it can't tell you when this is going to happen, it can't tell you, in what order things are going to happen. It can only tell you that it's unsustainable. It's the business cycle theory is going to be able to tell you that it's not going to last. The resources are going to have to undergo a mass reallocation, and that if you try to stop that, you're only going to make it worse. And so that's the phase we're in now. It's happened. They're doing everything they can to, get us back to 2008 and get us back on that same track. They're still printing money and still trying to prop up the housing market. And as Peter Schiff and as any Austrian would have said, it's only making it worse and drawing it all out, because that mass correction and this reallocation still has to happen and still is being prevented from happening.
So in retrospect of the housing crisis, couldn't one say that if they understood the business cycle that they would have been able to get out of it on time?
Well, like I said, the economics can't tell you when it's going to happen. Even as an Austrian, I might want to get in on a bubble. I know perfectly well this bubble's going to burst, but I think it's got 3 or 4 years, and I think I can make some money and get out before that happens. Even if I understand that, which obviously not everybody does, but even if I understand that, I may still get in, and I may still, very well commit an error about when it's going to happen and get stuck in it and lose a lot of money.
Right. You mentioned predictions, which draws me to my next question: is what is a quantitative prediction, or an example of one, and why don't Austrians actually make them?
Okay, so like a really clear quantitative prediction would be, a year from now, unemployment is going to be 8.2%. Okay, that's obviously a quantitative prediction. It's kind of a quantitative prediction to say, for example, if you raise the minimum wage by $1, unemployment will go up. It's still kind of qualitative, but I kind of file it under quantitative because it's not the kind of statement that as an Austrian economist, can really make. Because if you raise the minimum wage by $1 and also slash taxes at the same time, so you've got upward pressure and downward pressure simultaneously on unemployment, you don't know which of those is going to have a greater effect. Is unemployment actually going to go up or down? You don't really know. So we say, if you raise the minimum wage by $1, unemployment will be higher than it otherwise would have been. Or another way to say the same thing, other things being equal, raising the minimum wage will raise unemployment. But everything else is never equal, so that's not an especially helpful statement.
Now, I'm kind of to switch gears a little bit. There seems to be two schools of thought in Austrian economics. You kind of touched base on it in the beginning. One is what you would call, the Rothbardian side, and also the Hayekian, or I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, hermeneutic school side of the Austrian school. What are the big differences between each side?
Yeah, I'm still exploring that. And trying to determine, because for one thing, there are a lot of correlations that I don't have a causal explanation for, like the hermeneutical Austrians, like Steve Horowitz, for example. Every single one that I've ever talked to is a fractional reserve guy. They are fans of fractional reserve banking, whereas your Rothbardians, or the non-hermeneuticals, pretty well universally are hard money people. And I don't know why that is. I do know that the hermeneutical guys like Steve Horowitz will tell you that empirical observation can't be done without. It's an extremely important part of economics, where I would say, or a Rothbardian would say that that's once you're engaging in or making use of empirical observations, you're doing something besides economics. If you're a historian, obviously you're going to be using some actual historical observable facts and some theory of economics to tie them all together into a narrative and a story, but that once you're using those observable facts, you're not doing economics, you're doing something else. So as far as epistemology and how we approach economics, that seems to be the main difference. Why that seems to universally lead to a difference of opinion on fractional reserves, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Don't they also have differences on, inflation and deflation, where Rothbardians say falling prices are good, and hermeneutical Austrians will say that deflation is bad also?
Yeah, I would file that under, I mean, the main reason almost anybody is in favor of monetary inflation or fractional reserves is because of their analysis of what happens under deflation and why deflation is harmful. And the Rothbardian Austrians have answers to that. No, deflation is not so bad. There's no real reason to be afraid of it. But that's all bundled up, I think, in the study of fractional reserve banking.
Yeah, and you mentioned empirics, and one objection and criticism of, whenever I hear this from critics, I always mumble to myself, more empirics. Why is it? What's your response to when Austrians get dismissed as rejecting empirics or at least science when they say you guys aren't testing your theories, you're not making. What is your response to that?
That's a long one, so I'll try to sum it up as quickly as I can. I think one of the main points is that not all knowledge is hypothetical, right? So the scientific method says you make some observations, you identify some patterns, you try to, out of that you build a theory to predict new observations, things that haven't yet been observed, and then you can use that to test your theory. But you can't do that with statements like no two straight lines can enclose a space. You could not even conceptualize an experiment to test that or an observation that would falsify it. It can't be done. Right. So that's not hypothetical knowledge. And economics, as Austrians see it, is not a hypothetical pursuit. We start with the literally undeniable axiom, man acts, and we derive from there. And then what we derive from there can't be falsified by observation. When I say if you raise the minimum wage, unemployment will be higher than it would otherwise have been, you can't go back and test that and say, aha, unemployment is not higher than it would otherwise have been. It's not a falsifiable prediction, which in some ways is unfortunate. It would be nice to be able to make more specific falsifiable predictions, but if you find that that's not as useful as you would like, it's inappropriate to then try to make predictions that are simply false, to develop theories that make predictions that you can't actually make.
And also kind of like what some Austrians say is that people aren't, for instance, as you would say before, people aren't protons. We're not robots. There's no constants in human action.
Right. Exactly.
Now, with that being said, and I get this sometimes from neoclassicals and monetarists, that they will say that you can't predict human behavior, but some will say, for instance, as an example, well, we can certainly narrow it down. For instance, I can go to Starbucks every day, get a cafe latte every single day, so obviously people are fit in certain patterns. Is there a difference between economics and me going out and getting a Starbucks latte every single day?
Yeah, because obviously there are patterns, because if you like lattes, you're probably still going to like lattes tomorrow. Right. That doesn't mean that you can generalize across the population and make macroeconomic predictions about the degrees to which people are going to respond to certain changes or whatever. You can say that if what are the things that I like today, there's going to be some similarities to what I like tomorrow, and the prices I'm willing to pay for things today, there's likely to be very similar to what I'm willing to pay for them tomorrow, unless today I've bought the last unit that I need to satisfy my desires at those prices, in which case I'm not going to buy another one tomorrow unless prices fall, which is generally not going to be true for lattes because I drink them and they're gone. But if I'm buying rolls of toilet paper every day, at some point I've probably got all the toilet paper I need, and I'm not going to for a while. And so, but whatever you can and can't predict about an individual's behavior, given that you know it. For example, you could look at a Starbucks store and say that they sell this many drinks per day on average, and you can use that as a starting point to narrow down your margin of error. How many drinks are they going to sell tomorrow? But that's really an entrepreneurial prediction, not an economic prediction.
Right.
And so you really can't quantify these things that are somewhat predictable for an individual, or even for a group of individuals, say Starbucks customers. You can't make quantitative predictions. For example, you can't say, if I raise the price of all the drinks at Starbucks by $1, then I'm going to sell this many drinks tomorrow. You could only get that right by being lucky.
That's true. To switch gears again, some people on the left, or sometimes libertarians also, tend to cite Hayek or even Hazlitt, that they advocated for a social safety net, or as well as even infrastructure. If I recall in economics in one lesson, Hazlitt is actually saying, taxes are needed for roads, bridges. So is that at all conflicting, since the two are Austrians and they're getting their information from the Austrian school?
Yeah, Mises did some of the same thing. I think Hayek conceded more to the state than Mises did, and Hazlitt did as well. I am inclined to forgive them because they kind of, for the most part, preceded Rothbard, who was one of the first Austrians to be able to point out how, in fact, the market could provide the things that these other guys didn't see how could be provided. For example, especially defense, right? Defense and legal services, justice, basically. It has almost always, by almost everyone, been taken for granted that only the state can provide these things. And Rothbard was one of the first Austrians to recognize that that isn't the case. And so he kind of tried to correct Mises on that count. And without explicitly doing so, I think Mises conceded the point. He did have a lot of very nice things, and only very nice things, to say about man, economy, and state, where he said this and made those corrections. So I have never read that Mises explicitly made that concession, but I wonder if maybe he did. And then Hayek and Hazlitt, made some, from the modern perspective, especially the modern Austrian perspective, made similar errors.
That's true. Now, as far as you mentioned about Rothbard being a student, if I'm not mistaken, didn't praxeology tell Mises that which Rothbardians tend to be, are anarcho-capitalists? Didn't praxeology, Mises say through praxeology, that anarcho-capitalism isn't possible?
He didn't see, that was even Rothbard occasionally makes these errors. He made the assertion in Human Action without referring to praxeology. He didn't deduce that anarchism was impossible. He said, but because of, I don't remember exactly what his argument was, that markets couldn't provide defense, but it was very brief and kind of dismissive, and I think because everyone else already agreed with it. Because whatever it was he said, then obviously we have to have a government. Otherwise, we couldn't have police or something like that. And so it was just a very brief, dismissive statement in Human Action where he made the claim that anarchism wouldn't work.
That's okay. Lousy statists. Now, one thing that the left likes to champion is single payer in other countries, such as the Scandinavian model. Is there anything that can be told to those individuals that would advocate it when they use those models as vindication for such policies? Like, are they missing anything? They'll bring up statistics and say an article, a link saying, it is possible because I got statistics here, but is there anything that they are missing or should be looking at deeper, as an Austrian?
Yeah, and sure, and it is possible, and it's also very complicated, especially in Scandinavian countries where you have very high taxation and great big social services part of the state, but also very little regulation, very little corporate taxes in these countries, far lower than they are in the U.S. And so there's a lot of complex things. Yes, they have high taxes. They also have much less regulation. So they've got this giant healthcare sector that's paid for out of these taxes. They have this high quality of life, and is that because of lower corporate taxes, or because of very little regulation, or is it because everybody's so much happier because the government's giving them goodies? So it is very complex to pick out a particular example that's implemented some very large scale policy and notice that in general they have a okay quality of life. From an economic perspective, so this complexity is inevitable. It's almost always very complex, and so you want to isolate the individual factors. And so you can say, for example, that a single payer situation is going to tend to introduce moral hazard, is going to introduce overconsumption of healthcare and underproduction, where excellent doctors with excellent equipment can't charge more than brand new doctors with not so much equipment, and so you're going to end up with underproduction and overconsumption, and prices are going to tend to go up. And so either you have to keep raising taxes on that, or doctors start dropping out, and so it is ultimately going to be unsustainable, even in the Scandinavian countries, where one of the solutions to this, as it has been in France and elsewhere in Europe, is to try to send the bill to the next generation, right? To borrow the money and hope to tax it later. But it is ultimately going to prove unsustainable, even in the countries where it's working out reasonably well at the moment, especially the Scandinavian countries, because other than this taxation, the government is pretty good about staying out of the way.
All right. One thing that is pretty popular among libertarians is Bitcoin. Now, this is one that I got off the page We the Individuals, and a question is that there's a lot of debate on Bitcoin and the regression theorem. Now, the question is, and you might know what it is that does Bitcoin qualify as money? And if so, is it in line with the Austrian School, or does it redefine money as Austrians know it?
Well, it doesn't yet qualify as money the way Austrians have generally defined money, which is something along the lines of the most marketable commodity. So it's if I could confidently go to the grocery store right now and give them Bitcoin and bring food home, then maybe it would have achieved money status. But that's not true yet, and it may never be true. Now, the regression theorem says that in order for money to emerge from a barter economy, it must first have a use value. We can't nobody in a barter economy, you wouldn't just start name a good as money and it would start circulating as money without it having some practical use. So that's what the regression theorem says, and some of the Bitcoin detractors say that Bitcoin violates the regression theorem because it has no use value. You wouldn't use Bitcoin for anything but exchange, or at least nobody ever did use it for anything but exchange. But Bitcoin is not emerging from a barter economy. We don't have that requirement for a new money to emerge in an existing money economy, is the answer to the regression theorem objection.
Another objection that I got on the on We the Individuals was, and I'll quote it, my greatest problem, and you actually encountered this individual, my greatest problem with the Austrian School is their denial of the intrinsic value of money. I think many of them are starting to stretch the subjectivity of value to meaning absolute subjectivity. Now, that is clearly a logical fallacy. This is why they often blindly refuse to see the problems that gold as a currency has. So I want to know if you had any response to that.
Sure, because I remember this and I remember answering him. So in order to say what he said, I think he's got to be kind of moving around on his definition of value. When I value money, I think that it's a little imprecise to say that, because in general, what we mean when we say value is the value of a good to me that does something for me, and which is subjective. I'm a coin collector, therefore rare coins are subjectively more valuable to me than they are to you, because I want to keep them and look at them, and you don't. Now, money is objectively valuable because it's an objective fact that I can, in fact, take it to the grocery store and give it to somebody and bring food home. But I don't value money as an end. I don't subjectively value money. Money has what's probably better called a price. It has, I think, the same guy who made that comment said a use value, but that just means it's a means rather than an end. If I get a rare coin, I've acquired that. It's my end. I'm not going to do anything with it but have it and love it and call it my precious. And I don't get it so that I can accomplish some other goal. When I do something for money or trade something for money, I want money because money is very useful in satisfying a large array of subjectively desired ends. It's objectively useful for that. So to use the term value for money in the same way that we use it for the things that we want for their own sake is a little imprecise, and so we have kind of a semantic problem there.
Okay. Now, what is as far as intrinsic value? Why is that according to Austrians non-existent?
Right. So it's often said, kind of casually at least, not usually by people who are really seriously looking at it, but at least casually, that gold, for example, has intrinsic value. And I am guessing that what people mean by that is that it has always been considered valuable. You could always count on gold to be something you could trade for, that it would hold value if you kept it. It will still be valuable 50 or 100 years from now. If you pass it on to your grandkids, it's still going to be valuable for them, and that's true for kind of a combination of reasons. People have, if not always, then at least for a very long time, widely subjectively valued gold as something beautiful that you can put on your ears or do things with, and in more modern times, it's also useful in certain industrial processes, and so its subjective value for a great many people goes back a long way, and then of course it's very scarce, and because of that and other properties like it's portable, it's durable, it's fungible, it has all the properties of what at least a Rothbardian Austrian would consider good money, and so it's become so it was used as money for thousands of years, and so, when you look back over those thousands of years and see that it consistently has been valued, you might casually say it has intrinsic value, but nobody's going to attempt to tell you what its intrinsic value is, right? Because I think they're just kind of being imprecise, except that I don't exactly know what they mean by that. But none of them will try to tell you what its intrinsic value is. It's objectively consistently valuable, but if everybody decided they don't care about gold anymore, nobody has any use for gold anymore, then its value is going to go away because nobody subjectively values it as an end, and if nobody also subjectively values it as a means for subjectively values the ends that it's useful for, any of the its industrial uses or for jewelry or anything like that, they'll find that it has no value. Nobody will trade for it because nobody wants it, and then you discover that its value is subjective.
Okay, you mentioned Rothbard a couple times, and he's probably my favorite Austrian. Is would you say Rothbard is your favorite Austrian?
That's a tough one. He's definitely up there. I think of all the Austrians I've read, he has said the most while committing the fewest errors, and so I guess that would make him my favorite. So there's, are you familiar with Jesus Huerta de Soto?
Yeah, he's one of my favorites too.
I think I've never seen him make an error that I was able to catch, but his specialty is kind of narrow, and so he hasn't said as many things, commented on as many subjects as Rothbard has. And I'm also a fan of Hans Hermann Hoppe, who does comment on a lot of things. I think he has committed more errors than I've caught Rothbard making, but he's also made some really novel and I think important contributions, and I have a little bit of bias toward him because I was reading an essay by Hoppe when I had my conversion experience to anarchism.
Okay, well, as far as I probably should have asked this earlier, but was it the financial crisis that got you into Austrian economics, or no, or maybe I should just put it this way: why Austrian economics? Why did you choose Austrian economics versus neoclassical or monetarism or even Keynesian economics?
Well, it's interesting. It didn't have to do with the financial crisis. It actually had to do. I kind of accidentally fell in love with coin collecting, and that led me to get interested in several things at once. History, for example, and then I started reading about basically money. The history of how money was produced, and then I started learning these crazy things like every time I swipe my credit card, money is created, and that just blew my mind. And so I read and read and read, and De Soto, actually, Jesus Huerta de Soto, was the first. His book was the first piece of Austrian text that I'd ever read, and it was a giant tome. And I didn't know at the time that I was Austrian, but so that was, I guess, my first foray into Austrian economics.
Now, also something I probably should have asked earlier. There's obviously the video Hayek versus Keynes. What would you say the big, for those who don't know, what would you say the biggest differences in methodology between the two schools of economic thought would be on Austrian and Keynesian?
Well, methodologically, the difference between the Austrian school and the Keynesians is the same as the difference between the Austrian school and every other school of thought that at least still exists. I think there have been other schools of thought that use the same methodology, which is the a priori and deductive methodology of the Austrian school, but that they're not really around anymore. But every other existent school, the Keynesians, the Virginia School, the Chicago School, as far as I'm aware, every existing school of thought except for the Austrians share the same basic methodology and just differ in certain conclusions.
I think you left out Georgists too.
Oh, I usually will, yeah.
What would, as far as the Austrians, since they do tend to go back and forth at each other, what would you say is what would it be, coming from as an Austrian, what would you say is your biggest disagreement with Keynesian economics?
I mean, so say for example, they've got this multiplier that they apply to government spending because, I mean, there is absolutely no way that any such assertion can be defensible. Whatever, even if you say that the multiplier is 1, you cannot defend that. If you even say that it's greater than 1 or less than 1 without trying to say what it actually is, there can be no defense of that assertion. You can, if you do name it, you can make predictions, and they have universally been wrong, but they still assert that there is this multiplier. That entire school of thought, I mean, obviously they're economists. Not every single thing they say is wrong, but where we disagree with them, it's hard to say what's the most important one to me or what's the one I like to focus on, except possibly their theory of the business cycle, because it's, at least the way Keynes put it, it's the animal spirits. It's what they don't appear to think they have to do is explain when everybody goes wrong in the same direction at the same time, that maybe there needs to be an explanation for that, and that animal spirits doesn't quite do it. So maybe that's the most frustrating assertion of the Keynesians to me, or the most frustrating failure to answer an important economic question.
Yeah, I mentioned this to Amanda Billyrock in our interview, that whenever I think of the Keynesian multiplier, I always think of the there's this image I saw of on the Bastiat Institute that has a picture of Santa Claus that says the Keynesian multiplier. It's like believing in Santa Claus, and that probably just sums it up perfectly.
I think that's a pretty fair analogy.
Whenever I think of the now, as far as the multiplier, couldn't actually the broken window fallacy be applied to the, in a simplistic way, the broken window fallacy be applied to the, or used as a critique to the multiplier effect?
It seems like there might be something. I'd have to put some thought into whether that might be. It doesn't say. I don't think it's directly applicable because we're not really talking about destroying things in order to simulate economies. But there may be something in there that you can use that to make a formal objection to the multiplier theory.
Some people actually, speaking of, because we're not actually advocating destroying things, some people actually do say, well, as a critique to the broken window fallacy, people aren't actually, quote, people aren't actually, advocating war and destruction, so the broken window fallacy is a fallacy in itself because we're not advocating destruction. But would you have like a response to that? I mean,
well, sure. I mean, I don't know who we is, but like if you look at FDR during the Depression, plowing under crops and slaughtering pigs and it was mass destruction. That in order, at that time, the thought was that all this destruction would prop up prices, which were trying to fall. Prices of agricultural goods and many other things were just attempting to fall, and so FDR wanted to prop up these prices by just wiping things out. And then we've got all kinds of advocates of people saying, well, look at World War II, it got us out of the Depression because that's what war does, right? So yeah. I'm not sure who is meant by we when people say that, but the people who adhere to these economic theories generally do advocate mass destruction as a means of stimulating the economy.
And I also think even if they're not actually saying broken windows or quote, broken windows as an analogy is a good thing, that's usually the same conclusion that they come to with aggregate demand, saying it's what makes things go.
Right.
Okay, but that's all actually the questions that I had, and everyone watching, I hope you actually enjoyed a little bit of a tutorial to Austrian economics. And Rocco, again, thank you very much for your time and for answering the questions, and I hope everyone else has a good night.
My pleasure.